Good morning, y'all. Welcome to the BirthFit podcast. I am Dr. Lindsey Matthews Cantu, your BirthFit founder and CEO. Y'all, right now I'm sitting in a hotel room and they have an awesome little balcony outside. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see, but the morning sun is just hitting me perfectly, and I'm obsessed because, as many of you know, I did a quantum biology practitioner training postpartum. I don't know if that was one of the smartest things I've done, but it took me about a year and a half to complete. Anyway, so now I'm obsessed with the sun and well, I was obsessed with the sun before, but it gave me the actual science knowledge as to why I intuitively felt called to be a sun goddess. Anyways, okay. Just want to let y'all know I'm loving the vibes I'm getting right now. Okay, this episode is number 263. And today we're going to do a quick chat on station grading and Friedman's curve. Excuse me. But before we move on, y'all, I'm so bad about announcements. I will do better. I promise. Intention out there. Please go check out our nonprofit.birthfit.com. We're in the open funding season. We need money. We need money to offer some support for women. And our goal with the BirthFit nonprofit is to provide labor doula support or postpartum doula support for those that are active, like have a spouse active duty military, or they were military at one point. So please go donate. That would mean a ton to me. Um, I would greatly appreciate it. And I know those mamas receiving the love from the BirthFit nonprofit would love that as well. All right, so the other announcements I want to share with you is the BirthFit coach course will be transitioning into what is named or called the BirthFit certification. I will have more info to come. However, the schedule remains the same. We will have a fall cohort. Um, yeah, I'll share more because we're working on a new logo, things like that. But y'all, I probably should have done this years ago because when I pull, like when I gather the data from those inside the coach course, it's always about 50% fitness related. So that could be a strength and conditioning coach, a CrossFit coach, a personal trainer, a yoga instructor. Like we have two yogis in there right now. In the past, I think in one cohort I had 5 yogis, but some sort of fitness related. And then the other 40 to 50% is practitioners, y'all. I love it. I love it so much. And that just shows me that chiropractors, as a chiropractor myself, chiropractors are listening. Thank you, finally. Um, but also that other practitioners like OBs and midwives and let's even doulas and acupuncturists join the course. It just shows me that people are realizing, practitioners, professionals are realizing how important movement is and how important nervous system support is. Um, yeah, super freaking cool. So anyways, more on that to come. Let's get rolling because I promised y'all short, sweet, go straight to the punch episodes. All right, so we'll get through this in about 10 to 15 minutes, then you can go about your day. And yeah. Okay. As many of you know, the tools measuring labor eh, are mediocre at best. And what I'm talking about are the some of the two biggest tools used to measure labor. There's, I don't know if there's other ways. Like I've seen midwives observe the crack in women's booties, and there's a line that, gosh, I forget the name of that. but you can tell basically looking at the sacrum of a woman and how expanded that is. You don't have to do any vaginal exams. You can also just look at the woman and see if she's in transition or not. But anyways, the two biggest tools used to measure labor were never intuitively or objectively, or in my opinion, commonsensically built. So what I'm talking about is the fetal station grading and then Friedman's curve. So both were built basically on data from a single overnight shift in the 50s, specifically around 1952, I believe. And that's Friedman's curve. And literally just based on one sample size from a New York hospital, like 500 white women on that shift. Um, and if you're trying to create an objective that you apply across the entire population of women, uh, yeah, that doesn't really work. So, anyways, these two grading systems have shaped and continue to shape how millions of women are measured, managed, and even intervened with during labor. Like they're labeled as failing. And if you're like me and, a recovering perfectionist, if somebody labels you failing, that's going to drive you effing insane. Um, are you somebody that has been told, or, in the past, were you somebody that was told your labor wasn't progressing or that the baby hasn't moved? Keep listening. If maybe you've heard it from your clients, this might piss you off. Anyways, okay, so fetal station. It's a number that is really just a guess. Y'all, when your provider, I should say it, talk in a different way because when a provider, not your provider, when a provider checks one's cervix, so there's a vaginal exam. And as y'all know, I don't love vaginal exams because they come with risk, and I kind of think a lot of them are unnecessary. Um, but when they do a vaginal exam, this usually is in the hospital, more commonly in the hospital, less commonly in birth centers, and a lot less common at home births. Um, but when the provider says baby's at zero station or negative station, they're estimating how far baby's head has descended into the pelvis. And the reference points they're using are the ischial spines, which are the two bony bumps that you sit on, like your sit bones are your ischial tuberosities. So from those, we call, like, there's bony prominences we call the ischial spines. So it could be -2, -1, 0, +1, +2 as baby moves down. Now, this was created in around 1924 by Dr. Joseph DeLee, who's known in Western medicine as the godfather of obstetrics. For those of you that have done your history and your research, you know that he may not have been the kindest person. Um, yeah, I think even there was a statue of him that was torn down at some point. Anyways, yeah, but he chose the ischial spines because they were the easiest to feel during a vaginal exams. So fast forward, that was about the 1920s. And then 1988, so we got 60 years of using that system, if you're inside the Western medical system. In 1988, ACOG finally updated it or took a look at it. I don't want to call it updated because they still use it, but instead of measuring in threes, like -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, they updated it to fives, -5, -4, -3, -2, -1, and so on. Um, and their intention was for each number to represent roughly 1 centimeter. So just think about that. Most providers, like in my experience as a doula in the hospital, when a station grading was given, most don't specify if they're using the threes or the fives. Weird. Um, and also it's so subjective. So two providers examining the same woman at the same time can assign different station numbers. There's no standardized way to measure accuracy because pelvic anatomy, the examiner's hand size, swelling in labor, even the baby's position can change what the provider perceives. And I want y'all to think about that in relation to the dilation measuring, the effacement measuring. Like, y'all, all of this is subjective. You got to know that. You got to know that. So, if you're, let's say if you're a doula, or if you are working with somebody to prepare them for labor, put this out there, let her know, and maybe she comes back with, fast forward, that was like second trimester. Y'all are talking about education stuff. Maybe as she's getting adjusted, maybe in a training session, maybe in her PT session, whatever. But you say, hey, I just want you to be aware, the grading systems by which labor progresses, station reading, Friedman's curve, and then also cervical dilation and effacement, they're pretty subjective. So do some research on it. Let me know if you have any questions. Come back. Okay, fast forward. She comes back. And maybe the doc is talking about, hey, um, if you haven't had your baby by this time, especially first time moms, if you haven't had your baby by this time, we're going to need to induce you. Well, my tool that I would always use is ask questions, right? Ask questions. So with this first time mom, hey, okay, as we're progressing, have you asked your provider, he wants to induce you tomorrow. Have you asked him your bishop score? Because station grading is part of that. Or you don't even have to ask the bishop score. What, how far is baby descended? Like, because the lower baby is, the more likely a vaginal birth is going to happen after an induction. If baby's still super high in pelvis, and for some reason you need to get baby out, a C-section may be the least traumatic from there. Anyways, okay. And if you're a doula or somebody attending a woman in labor, has position been optimized? Has time been given? Has the woman been allowed to move freely? Because movement, as we've talked about in our coach course, literally just the last 2 weeks, that's going to move the needle the fastest as far as labor progression. Okay, and maybe labor takes a pause. Has the woman been adjusted? As a chiropractor, I used to go adjust women all the time in labor. Um, acupuncture can help. Although maybe that's more early labor, but I've known some women that have used acupuncture during labor. All right, so, and the last thing I would ask is, has a different provider assessed? But remember, vaginal exams come with their own risk. Station grading should never be the only reason for intervention. Like, oh, baby hasn't gone past 0, time to intervene. Um, just making that up. But really, station grading should never be the sole reason to intervene. Okay, let's talk Friedman's curve real quick because this is hot topic. And I think if I remember correctly, because it's been years since I've watched The Business of Being Born, but they talk about this really legit inside of The Business of Being Born movie. And for you young ones, if you haven't seen The Business of Being Born, do it. That is a monumental documentary that started waking people up in our country. Gosh, go Ricky Lake. All right. So 1952 was Friedman's curve. Dr. Emanuel Friedman, a young resident at Columbia. He spent one night on call tracking cervical dilation in laboring women. This was at the New York hospital. He was doing it as a favor for Dr. Virginia Apgar. Yes, that Apgar, and that's another story for another day. But he wanted to, Virginia Apgar wanted to study how anesthesia affected labor. By morning, Friedman noticed something. He had plotted dilation over time, and that data formed an S-shaped curve. Slow progress at first, the latent phase, then rapid acceleration, active phase, and then a slowdown at the end, the deceleration phase. He drew the curve by hand and published it in 1954 and called it the graphic analysis of labor. 2 years later, he did his follow-up study. Oh, I'm sorry. I was not clear on this. This is the study that everything's based on. He started it with a one night tracking. So 2 years later, this is where the 500 women, all white women at one hospital, one observer, no statistical modeling. And that became like embedded in obstetric training, labor management protocols, and the diagnosis of failure to progress, which is like, y'all, that failure to progress diagnosis is the leading indication for unplanned cesarean delivery in the United States. So here's some obstacles that I see. Active labor was defined as 4 centimeters, but for those of us that have been in the birth world a while, we know that there was a larger, more recent study, I think it was about 2010, that found that labor typically accelerates around 6 centimeters. And this is where the phrase 6 is the new 4 came out. Like doulas were saying, I remember it when I was attending births at Cedars in Los Angeles, they had buttons, like, you know how we used to pin buttons on ourselves? I don't know if I might be dating myself, but the nurses had buttons in L&D that said 6 is the new 4. Crazy. But what that means is so many women, thousands of women, were diagnosed as failing labors when they were progressing just fine. Okay, it's taking a while. You're still at 4 centimeters, right? But active labor is truly later or at 6 centimeters. I don't want to say at 6 centimeters because then I'm joining that side, but you've got to give women time. Okay, and the deceleration phase was never real. It has never been reliably replicated in larger data sets, and it is now considered an artifact of Friedman's original interpretation. Labor today, so if we look at labor today compared to what it was in the 50s, it's a bit longer, and this is likely due to higher maternal BMIs, older age at first birth, increased epidural use, and labor induction. And I would add also due to our more sedentary lifestyle as a population as a whole. So population changes happen, which, okay, we could talk about those, negative or positive, but the providers are defaulting to the same timeline from the 50s. And we talked about the study, the homogeneous and tiny study that's been used for 60 years. And then finally, 62 years later, ACOG updated its guidelines, 6 is the new 4. But the damage was done. Entire generations, y'all, think of all the medical students that were taught 4 is active labor. The damage was done. All right, so what do you do with this information? If you are a woman preparing for labor, I think knowing the general history is critical. I would also start asking your provider questions like, and it's hard to know what questions to ask. I get that because the questions you want to ask specifically for this, you would already be in labor, so you would need your partner, husband, doula, whoever's there to ask. But what I would ask is, hey, can I go to 42 weeks full? That's considered full-term pregnancy. When do you start moving the needle for induction, or when do you start pushing for induction? And what do you base induction on? Those are some questions I would ask. And then in labor, like what guideline is this decision based on? You can ask that for anything. What does the evidence say about safe wait times before intervention? And then, if somebody says failure to progress, progressing compared to what? Like, this is my body and my body's unique. Keep in mind, movement goes a long way. And you could start moving now. Be sure to check out our prenatal programs. Yes, that's a plug. Yes, do it. I am hands down sold on our prenatal programs because I've seen them work and I've done them myself. Okay, anyways, if you're a coach, doula, practitioner, I feel like you've got to understand the history a little bit more so that you can teach it to your clients, to your practice members in a simple way. Um, you're not gonna like this education session, you're not gonna be able to teach your client this in labor. So you got to start ahead of time and sprinkling this information in there. Um, and if you can understand the history and you can communicate that, your client's going to start asking questions. Um, if you're attending a woman in labor, if you're serving a woman, document what you observe, write things down, put it in your notes section in the phone. And then, when forks in the road come up, especially if it's a longer labor, look back at your notes and then support movement before labor. If we want our clients to move in labor, it's got to be intuitive. So get them moving now. All right, y'all. That's it. In my opinion, fetal station grading and Friedman's curve aren't malicious tools, right? Like, just like with anything in history, I don't believe they came from a malicious place. Um, I'd like to believe, right? Like Bill Gates is not malicious, but we all know like he's like king of depopulation, and I'll stop there. But anyways, I try to look for the good intention, and I do think there was a good intention there. They were came from an attempt to bring some objectivity to a process with so many unknowns, right? Like birth has so many unknowns. But we have to respect the process. We have to honor those unknowns. And, we take the information God gives us in a moment of time. We don't know some things for a reason. But these grading tools were built on incomplete, non-representative data and never, ever, ever updated. That's what bugs me is like some of these things were set in stone. They became the gospel. They became how we did things and they were never questioned. And when you do that, that causes real harm. Um, they become unquestioned authority, and that's not cool. So remember, BirthFit has always been about closing the gap between what the evidence actually says, standard practice, and intuitively mother-led experiences. The history of these two tools is a clear example that that gap is there and it still persists. So share this information. Please share this episode. Thank you for listening. I hope you got something out of it. Mark it, save it, and don't forget to donate to our nonprofit. Thanks, y'all. Hope you have a great week.